Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with the mid-year book Freakout tag. I'm pretty sure I'm actually going to get this up on time this year. We'll see. That'll be very exciting. I think this is my third year doing this tag maybe. It's kind of a booktube tradition. I wasn't tagged in it and I'm just really excited to answer these questions again. The original videos were by Ellie at Earl Grey Books and Chammy. I will link both of those originals down below. I have multiple answers for most questions because I read a lot. I think I'm like almost at 100 books on the day I'm filming this, which is June 27th. So we're not quite halfway through the year. Also, before I get into the questions, I want to shout out a brand new booktube channel who recently posted this tag, and that is Mariana Mas Books. I will link her video down below. It was just so fun to like see her start off her channel by answering these questions. And she does videos a lot for like other like things in her life or work, so she's already very confident in front of the camera. She's such a fun personality. She's very enthusiastic, and she talks about a lot of books. Like just from this one video I can see that she talks about a lot of books that are not necessarily the most hyped books. She also seems to read very widely, so she's also just like one of the loveliest people. Like her comments are always so wonderful and thoughtful, so please go give Mariana some welcome to booktube love. I will link her and her video down below. Number 1 is the best book you've read so far in 2021. I picked one from multiple categories. So I wanted to highlight a poetry book. This is one poem. This is The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. I like have mentioned this several times before. This was the poem that Amanda Gorman wrote and performed at inauguration, and it was beautiful. Like I have watched her performance several times and I definitely wanted to have a physical copy of this. I just think it's a really gorgeously written piece. I think it balances hope and hurt very well, and I do think this is probably going to hit harder for you if you are an American. I like just judging from reactions I've heard from people, not saying that you couldn't enjoy it if you're not, but I think there is probably a like personal aspect to that, so I did want to mention that. But I just think this is incredible. She has another poetry collection coming out later this year, I think in the fall, and I can't wait to get my hands on more of her work. And then the fiction book I want to talk about is a recent read. That is Ophi's Ghosts by Justina Ireland. And this book, actually, my friend Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly gifted this copy to me, and she annotated it as she went. So she did like sticky notes at the end of the chapter to like talk about her thoughts and reactions, so it was so fun getting to read those. And this is just a really, really incredible book. So it's a middle grade historical fiction with a spooky aspect. Our main character is Ophi, or Ophelia, and after a terrible event she realizes that she is able to see ghosts, and her mother and her end up moving north. This is set during the Great Migration. They move to Pittsburgh, and Ophi ends up getting a job at the same creepy old manor house that her mother works at, and the story is about the secrets and the ghosts that Ophi finds there. And it deals a lot with history and racism and trauma and how those things influence the present. I mentioned in my anticipated releases video that I really love when books use spooky or creepy elements to make a point about things, and this book does that beautifully. I loved the writing. I love Ophi as a main character, so definitely one of my favorite fiction reads so far. And then nonfiction, I have Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. I read this in January or February, and this was my first Jacqueline Woodson book, and this is all it took to get me fully on board the Jacqueline Woodson bandwagon. This is incredible. Like, I know people say this is incredible, so I'm really just like adding my 2 cents to what everyone else is already saying, but I wholeheartedly agree. It's beautifully written. This is a nonfiction memoir in verse, and it's just so interesting. I have never read something like this. Like, I've never read nonfiction in verse before, and it's just beautifully done. I love the way that Jacqueline Woodson writes. She is so intentional with her words, and there's so much beauty there, but also so much simplicity. Like, no word is wasted, and I feel like nothing is used just because it sounds good. Like, she is able to combine meaning and beauty so seamlessly, and it's just amazing. It's so impressive to me. I found the story she was telling about her childhood growing up in the South very compelling. Or not growing up, but she spent a lot of time there, like part of her childhood there with family. And then she also grew up partly in New York, so she talks about that experience. This is just such a fantastic work of nonfiction. I feel like it's such a good one for people who maybe aren't sure they're into nonfiction, or people who maybe aren't sure they're into stories told in verse. Because the way that this combines those things, I think it might make them less intimidating, but absolutely beautifully executed. I'm so excited to read more from Jacqueline Woodson. Number 2 is the best sequel you've read so far in 2021, and I'm pretty proud of myself. I've actually been reading a like decent number of sequels. And I have a couple here. So the first one is Amina's Song by Hannah Khan. This is a sequel to Amina's Voice, and this was just beautifully done. I think my wrap-up has already gone up where I talk about this book, so I will link that down below. But we follow Amina, and she has just come back from visiting her family in Pakistan, and she gets a school assignment where everybody's supposed to pick a like a historical figure and do a presentation on them. And Amina picks Malala Yousafzai, who is Pakistani, and she's so excited to share this land that she loves and where her family are from. And then her classmates really focus on the bad parts of Malala's story, so on the terrible things that happened to her. And so they use that as a reason to think of Pakistan as very like backwards and very like oppressed and all of this, and like they pity people who live there and all of that kind of thing. And so Amina is like, she's trying to figure out how she can make people see the complexity of this place that she loves, how she can show the beautiful parts and the good parts, and that's like a big part of the story. There's also like a really wonderful emphasis on family relationships and on doing good in your community. There's also like this kind of idea about how sometimes caring about people, it leaves you open to hurt, but that's like that it's worth it still. There's a really beautiful line about how Amina realizes that maybe her heart had to ache as it grew to make room for all these people and places that she loves. And I just think that's a really beautiful idea. And yeah, Hannah Khan just like always makes me cry in her books, but they're just so beautifully done, and this is definitely one of the best sequels I read. And then the other one I want to mention I do own, but I don't have it with me. It's like behind other books, and that is Gone Crazy in Alabama by Rita Williams Garcia. This is the third and final book in the Gaither Sisters series, and this is such a well done and hard book to read in some places, but it's just so brilliantly executed. So in this book we are following Delphine, the oldest sister. She's our perspective character, and her younger sisters Vanetta and Fern, and they all get sent to stay with their grandmother and great-grandmother in Alabama for the summer. And when they get there, they realize there's like this family feud going on, and Delphine starts uncovering more things about their family's history and about why these families are feuding. This book deals a lot with racism, and it also deals a lot with like the way that kids sometimes realize that adults are not always doing the right thing. Like Delphine has all these moments of like realizing that the adults around her are being ridiculous, like are doing these things that are not right. I just think the writing is fantastic. I think Delphine is so well realized as a character. I think the other characters are really well done too, and just very complex and messy, and like sometimes you're very angry at them, and then in the next scene you'll be really like hurting for them and feeling for them. Number 3 is a new release you haven't read yet but want to. So I picked 2 that I do own and I just haven't gotten to. I picked a fiction and a nonfiction. So for fiction I have We Are the Ashes, We Are the Fire by Joy McCullough. This is a story that I don't know if it's actually dual timeline, but it does deal with a present day storyline and then also some like historical aspects. So our main character is a girl who I think her sister was raped, and the trial, like they actually catch the person and they prosecute him, and then he is sentenced to no prison time. And so our main character is understandably heartbroken and infuriated, and this kind of throws her into this like this research on this historical kind of like legendary figure named Marguerite of Berceau, I think is her name. Yes, the story of a 15th century French noblewoman, Marguerite de Berceau, legendary as an avenging knight for rape victims. And so I think this book deals, like it combines those two storylines, and I think we're going to see how they mirror each other, how history repeats itself. I think this is going to be such a difficult book to read, which I think is one of the reasons I've been putting it off, but I think it's going to be fantastically done. Blood, Water, Paint also dealt with very difficult topics, but I think it was done really well. And I think Marguerite de Berceau, I'm pretty sure she's like a legendary, I don't know if she actually existed. She might be more apocryphal than anything. So I'm interested to see how that aspect of the story is handled in this book. And then a nonfiction book, although I have a lot of books I could talk about for fiction or nonfiction that I want to read. But that is The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Ellison Barr, How the Subjugation of Women Became Gospel Truth. I talked about this in my anticipated releases. Both of these I did actually. And I think this sounds like a really necessary, very timely book. So it's talking about how these like biblical ideas of like what a good woman should be are not actually based in the Bible. They are specific interpretations that have twisted things and deliberately misinterpreted things in order to subjugate women. And I just think this sounds very important and very needed. It's gotten excellent reviews so far, so I do really want to get to this one. I'm sure it's gonna make me angry, but I think it's going to be an excellent book. Number 4 is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I also have multiple for this one. So one of them, Frances Hardinge has a new book coming out this year, and to say I'm excited is an understatement. Frances Hardinge is one of my favorite authors, and she has a book coming out in, I think it's November, maybe earlier. It's called Unraveler. We don't have a cover yet. The only thing I really remember from the synopsis is that it's set in a world where people can put curses on each other, but only one person can lift them. And I can't tell from the summary if it's only like one person in the whole like area can lift them, or if it's like the only person who can lift them is like the person who did it or something. I should just look it up because I don't really need to know what it's about, but you guys might need to know what it's about. Okay, here we go. Kellen and Nettle live in a world where anyone can create a life-destroying curse, but only one person has the power to unravel them. But not everyone is happy he can do so, and suddenly he's in a race to save both himself and all those who have been touched by magic. So it sounds like it is just this one person who can lift them. Yeah, like, I don't really need to know what it's about. I'm going to be excited about it regardless, but that does sound like an interesting premise. And then I'm also really excited for Midnight in Everwood by, I think Kuzniar is the last name. I'll put the cover up here. This one I think also comes out in the fall, and this is a, like, I think Nutcracker retelling, and like the things that it like talks about in the synopsis. I love ballet retellings anyway, but this one sounds really good, and it sounds like it does something I really enjoy in fantasy, or like retellings too, where like it seems like this beautiful magical land, and then underneath that there's some creepy stuff. There's like some dark stuff going on. I like the sound of the characters and like the character dynamics and the world. So yes, really excited about that one. And then also one of my most anticipated releases for the whole year comes out in August. I think it's August, and that is Redemptor by Jordan Ifueko. The UK cover was released. It's beautiful. Ray Bear was my favorite book of last year, so I am so hyped for this. I can't wait to read it. Number 5 is Biggest Disappointment, and I have two. One of them definitely made me angrier than the other. So the first one is The House of 100 Clocks, or The House with 100 Clocks by, I'll put the cover up here. Yeah, I'm so sad about this. This was just very mediocre for me, and it wouldn't have been such a disappointment except that I had hyped it up in my head. Like, I thought this author was going to be a new favorite, and it was just very okay, like all the way through. It sounds like an interesting premise. It's about this girl who, her father is a clockwinder, and she and her father are still struggling with the death of this main character's mother, so his wife. They're both really struggling with that grief, and he gets this new position winding clocks for this like wealthy, eccentric man who has a house that's like full of clocks, and the rules are none of the clocks can ever stop. If they do, then this man gets to take everything that the main character and her father own, and the main character is very upset about that because one of the things that she owns is a parrot who used to be her mother's, and this is kind of her only connection that she has to her mother. So there's a lot at stake here, and then she ends up finding out more about the house and the clocks and the family. And this could have been so interesting, and it just wasn't. I feel like the characters were very bland. I feel like there were a lot of frustrating choices made just to like advance the story. I wasn't sold on the friendship. I also think the ending was very disappointing. There were some things I think could have been interesting about the choices the author made, but I just think she did them in ways that were not very satisfying, and that kind of like brushed things off that shouldn't have been brushed off, and just like serious or important issues that weren't given the time and explanation that they needed. So this one was very disappointing for me. And then my other disappointing one, which is one I read somewhat recently, is The Language of Fire by Stephanie Hemphill. This is probably one of the books that has made me angriest this year. This is a novel in verse story about Joan of Arc, and it just was disappointing on every level. The writing was so bad. It was like so bland and just like very generic, and it was like, I like novels in verse. This was not a good novel in verse. It was just like really bland, not great writing that was like spread out into stanzas basically. It felt very surface level. All of the commentary that I think it was trying to do felt very surface level, and the way this book characterized Joan was just like so disappointing and insulting. And I said this in my wrap up, I don't understand how you can write about Saint Joan of Arc and make her this boring. Like, I don't get it. It just doesn't make sense to me. And she was just characterized as like this very bland, like strong female character, like just like the most stereotypical version of that, and it was very frustrating. And I also mentioned in that wrap up some like personal reasons that like the author's note really irritated me. Like there's a choice that the author made which would not have been a bad choice, but the reason she gave for it was very annoying to me personally, which is not something I expect to bother everybody, but even just like the specific story issues I had with this book would have been enough to make it one of my most disappointing reads of the year. So yeah, I hated that one. Like the more I think about it, the more I'm like, was this mediocre or was this actually bad? And it's like, I think it's both. Yeah, I recommend Voices over this one by far, which is a different Joan of Arc novel in verse. Number 6 is Biggest Surprise, and once again I have two. The first one is Song of the Crimson Flower by Julie C. Dow. I was not expecting to love this one as much as I did. This wasn't even on my radar until my friend Margaret from The Word Nerd talked about it in a wrap-up, and the specific things that she enjoyed about it are things that I think I would really enjoy, and she also had not been pulled in by the premise at first. Because like when I heard about this book, it didn't sound like something I'd be into at all. And this was so good. It's a fantasy novel. It's like a spin-off of Julie C. Dow's other series, which I haven't read. Like it is a standalone set in that world, and I didn't have any trouble following anything. It probably spoils some things for the other books, but I didn't intend to read those, so it was fine. But I just love this. So we follow our main characters, Bao and Lan, and Lan is this beautiful, like wealthy man's daughter, and Bao is he's like an apprentice to a doctor, and he's much lower class, and because of some like identity mix-ups, Lan thinks that Bao is the man she's supposed to marry, and then when she finds out that he's not, of course Bao is actually in love with Lan at this point. She's very upset and she turns him down in a really like hurtful way. And then Bao leaves and gets cursed, and a bunch of things happen because of this curse, which essentially means that Bao and Lan have to travel together and try and find a way to break the curse. And this was just so cute and sweet. I loved the romance. I loved the characters. I really enjoyed the writing and the setting. I thought the plot was interesting. Like I just really enjoyed a lot of things about it, but the thing that really like took me by surprise was how much I loved these two main characters and their romance. And Lan's character development is also great. Like I just had so much fun with this. It was exactly the thing that I was in the mood for at the time, even though I didn't know it. So yeah, I loved that one. And then my other surprise I want to mention is Descendant of the Crane by Joan He. This was a buddy read with my friend Manal from Manal and Her Books, and this was a surprise because not only was the plot of this book actually very surprising to me, like I did not know what was going to happen or where things were going. There were a couple things I kind of had figured out, but most things I did not see coming, which was exciting in itself. But also I'm just surprised that this worked for me because there's so many things about it that I shouldn't have liked. Like the side characters aren't super well developed. The main character is constantly making some pretty serious mistakes because nobody will tell her literally anything, which is normally very frustrating. And this book there were things about it that I shouldn't have enjoyed. The romance was also kind of underdeveloped, but that I didn't care. I was still here for it. So I don't know why this book worked for me so much, but I did really enjoy it. It's a very political fantasy. I found our main character Hasina's plight very poignant. Like this poor girl, it feels like she's put in charge of this country just in time for everything to completely fall apart. And I thought the world was interesting. There was like a couple places where the plot I think went in some directions I didn't find as interesting, and I also really loved the courtroom drama scenes, and I wish we had gotten a lot more of those. But overall, I just enjoyed this way more than I would have expected based on issues that I normally complain about in other books, but this one I just enjoyed. Number 7 is favorite new author, debut, or new to you, and I always have trouble with this question because I don't usually consider someone a favorite author until I've read multiple books by them, and I don't always read like a new author and then multiple books by them in the same year. But I still have 4 answers for this question because I basically interpreted it like 4 different ways. So that's how we're gonna go. So I think for this, like what the question probably is asking, the best pick is Leah Cypess, who wrote Thornwood. I just loved this. Like, this is pretty low Goodreads ratings, but I was intrigued by this take on the Sleeping Beauty fairy tale, and I ended up really loving the way it was done. I really enjoyed the characters and the dialogue and the writing. I just think the plot choices were so interesting in this book. It went in a lot of surprising directions, and I just thought this was excellent. I also think the sister relationship was really interesting. So this is the first book I read by Leah Cypess, although I did read a short story from her last year that I really loved. So maybe this isn't exactly like a new to me author. But this is my answer for like an author that I read one book that I loved and that I think like it gives me a good feeling about their other books, even though I haven't read other novels by them. And then for an author that I did actually read multiple books by them this year for the first time, I have Mary Stewart. So my friend Mary Margaret, this is like one of her favorite authors, and she's the one who got me into her works. We actually buddy read I'm holding 9 Coaches Waiting. Madam Will You Talk, that's what it's called. We buddy read that one, which I really enjoyed, and then I read Nine Coaches Waiting later this year and loved it. She writes romantic suspense and her characters are just really great. Her writing is really fun. The story and the atmosphere, like the atmosphere is really one of the things she shines at, and like this like build of tension. It's just, her books are so compelling to read. And I also tend to enjoy, I mean, based on the 2 books I read from her, I do like her romances. I think sometimes the men are a little pushier than I tend to like. She was writing in the 50s, so I think that makes sense to an extent. But her female leads are always like very competent and really willing to stand up for themselves, so it doesn't feel like too icky to me. So yeah, really excited to read more from Mary Stewart. And then as for an author I've read before, but reading a book I loved, like kind of solidified them as a favorite author this year, that has to be Hannah Khan. This is now the 3rd novel I've read from her, and I have given all of them 5 stars. They've all made me cry, so we know they're good. Yeah, I just really love the way that she writes her characters. I love the way that she incorporates the themes and ideas in her books. She shows kids going through really big things and really small things, and I think she gives both of those care and love, and nuance, and yeah, I just love Hannah Khan. And then the last author I want to mention for this question is actually an author that I reread this year, and just like, I've known that I've really loved their books, but I don't think I like realize that they're like an all-time, I think, favorite author for me at this point, and that is Megan Spooner. I reread Sherwood this year, and like, I knew I loved this book. It was one of my favorite books I read the year I read it, but I reread it this year and I'm like, oh, this is like one of my all-time favorite books, I think. It's just a perfect book for me in a lot of ways. I know that this is a very polarizing novel, but I love it very dearly. This is a book that like I love so much that it hurts my chest a little bit. Actually, a lot of my favorite books are like that. So yeah, I really loved Hunted. I've really enjoyed the series that she co-wrote with Amy Kaufman, but Sherwood is definitely my favorite of hers, and it makes me so excited to read other things from her going forward. I just really love her characters. I love her perspectives in her books. I love the ideas that she writes. I think she's great at world building. I just enjoy her writing. Yeah. I'm gonna do like a whole review for this book at some point because I just love it so much, and I know that not everybody does, but I do. Number 8 is newest fictional crush, and shout out to those of us who actually answer this question. I feel like I can count on one hand the number of times per year that I actually see somebody answer this question and not say like, I don't get fictional crushes. I think that's kind of weird. Like, what's wrong with you guys? Not everybody says it like that, but to mention Mariana's video again, the way she said it is like, of course that not everyone gets fictional crushes, and you don't have to have them, and you don't have to answer this question, but she says you can do it without making a face. And that's kind of how I feel about it. Like, I just feel the reaction is often very judgmental, and not everybody who chooses not to answer this question is judgmental about it, so that's not what I'm saying, but I have definitely seen a lot of people who like pride themselves on not getting fictional crushes and who love making people who do feel bad, and that's irritating to me. Like, if you don't get them, that's fine, but like on the flip side, I find it hard to picture people not getting them, so I guess it's fair. Anyway, yes, I get fictional crushes, and the one I'm going to talk about, I actually did not read this book this year, but I did read it after the video of this tag that I did last year, so I think it still counts. And that is one I've talked about before. That is the love interest from The Other Bennett Sister by Janice Hadlow. I just love him so much. Like, he's so like funny and kind and smart, and I just love the way that he and Mary bond over literature. Like, he loves poetry, which I also love. He's like this really wonderful combination of like, I don't know, like practical and like very kind in like everyday ways, and also just this romantic at heart, and I just love that combination. So I really love him. He's definitely my newest fictional crush. Number 9 is newest favorite character. A specific main character that I just fell in love with so much from this book is Razzo from River Secrets by Shannon Hale. This is the 3rd book in the Books of Bayern series, and I really enjoyed Razzo in the previous books in the series. He was a side character there. But I loved him so much as the protagonist. Like, he's like very funny and like clever and like charming, but he doesn't think he is, and he's just like, he's very endearing. Like, he doesn't I mentioned in my wrap-up, like, I just have a soft spot in my heart for those characters that are like really funny, and they use their humor to like cover these feelings of inadequacy and like feeling like they're not good enough, and then getting to see them realize that they are good enough is just so wonderful. And I really loved watching Razzo's journey with that. He's just so funny. Like, in some ways he's so like clever and on top of things and just like very competent, and in other ways he's just like a total dork. And I love him. So yeah, I really loved Razzo. Number 10 is Book That Made You Cry. And if you have been watching my channel, you know that this is very hard to narrow down because I am a book crier. And not ashamed of it. But I did pick 2 that I like specifically remember crying a lot during. One of them is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, translated by Jeffrey Truslow, and yeah, this was definitely a very emotional book, which makes sense because the whole premise is based on people going back in time and like getting a chance to talk to somebody, and like if you're doing that, it's probably because you have regrets. For some reason, despite knowing the premise, I was not expecting this to be as emotional as it was, but it really was. I mean, like 3 of the 4 stories I think were very emotional. The third one was definitely the one that hit me the hardest, but the 3rd and 4th both made me cry quite a bit. Yeah, I think the emotional impact of this book and of these stories was just very much there for me. And I do really recommend that like collection. And then the other book I wanted to mention is actually another translated book, and that is Soul Lanterns by Shaw Kuski, translated by Emily Balistrieri. This is a very short middle grade novel. And it is brutal. It's really important though, and really well done. And we are following 3 school children. This is set in, I think, 1970. So it's 25 years after the United States bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this book specifically takes place on Hiroshima. And these 3 kids they're doing like a project for school. And it's an art project where they basically have to tell somebody's story. Like the theme for the art exhibition is Hiroshima then and now. So it's like before the bombings and after. And this book just really goes there. I mentioned in my wrap-up that even though I read a lot of really intense middle grade, there are still once in a while books that surprise me with how unflinching they are, and this book was definitely one of them. Like, it's not like the writing is very like pared down and spare, which I think works for the story, because one of the things that happens in this book is these kids realizing that the way they live is not how everybody else lives, and so they start out very matter of fact. It is a very emotional book to read. Like, I was very surprised at how specific the book was with some of the awful ways that people died during the bombing and after the bombing, because the radiation killed so many people. And like, yeah, it's very hard to read. Definitely be in like a good headspace going into this one, but I really think this is such an important book. I really think that every American at least should read this book. I think people from other countries could get a lot out of it as well. So yes, this one definitely made me cry a lot. But even though it is a book about grief and hurt, it is also about healing. Or at least healing as much as you can, and it's a book about the importance of peace. Number 11 is Book That Made You Happy, and this is the question that I always have the hardest time answering every year, which is interesting. I think that says something about the books I read, because it's not that I only read sad books, but it's like, I think even the books that have really joyful and happy things in them often have like some not so happy things in them as well. Like, it's rare that I read just like a purely happy and feel good book, but I do have an answer for this one, and that is the Artemis style graphic novels. These are the new redone ones with a new illustrator and everything. So the author is Owen Colfer. They are adapted by Michael Morecci and illustrated by Stephen Gilpin, and these just make me so happy because, for one thing, the original graphic novels were not good at all. These are much better, and this is just one of my favorite series, and I'm so excited to get to read them in a new format. I really hope that they finish the whole series. The Arctic Incident is the most recent one, and it came out this year, and I just really love the art style. Let's see if I can find some examples. I really love the art. I mentioned in my wrap-up that it's really nice to actually see the characters look like they're supposed to. Like, Holly actually has brown skin, which is very exciting. I mentioned also there's no unnecessary uncomfortable shower scene, so that's great. And I just think these are so well adapted. Like, I think if you don't know the original stories, you could still follow these really well. If you're already a fan like me, they still add a lot to the story. I really enjoyed the art and the way that like they interpreted some of the scenes in like a visual format. So these just made me so happy. I don't read a lot of graphic novels, but I loved these and I read these so quickly, and they really do just make my heart very happy. Number 12 is Most Beautiful Book You've Bought So Far This Year or Received, and I have a few, and these also these answers also kind of double as other books that came out this year that I really would like to read soon. So one I want to mention is What White People Can Do Next, From Allyship to Coalition by Emma Dabiri. This is the UK cover, which I specifically ordered this one because I like this design a lot better, this like kind of embroidered look. And I also think this is going to be a really important nonfiction book. Like, I don't mean to be shallow by putting this in the cover category, but this just looks like it's going to be really, really important, really well done. I really loved Twisted, which I read earlier this year, so I know I love Emma Dabiri's writing, and I think this is a very timely book, so I definitely want to read that soon. I also wanted to mention That Way Madness Lies, 15 of Shakespeare's most notable works reimagined, edited by Dahlia Adler. This is a collection of Shakespeare retellings that includes some of my all-time favorite authors, so obviously I'm incredibly excited about this. Anna Marie McLemore has a story here, Joy McCullough has a story here. There are also some authors that I haven't read yet, but I'm really excited to, like Kay Ancrum. So I think this is going to be wonderful, and I do really love this cover design, and the back is also just really wonderful. But yes, as a Shakespeare lover, I'm very excited to read this, and I also love the cover. And then the last one I kind of want to mention, oh no, it got dusty, is my UK edition. Again, you can see I really like UK paperbacks, is Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. I love the UK cover for this. I think this is so gorgeous. And I also like the design of the spine, and I didn't realize this, but it matches perfectly with my copy of Circe, which I actually got in a giveaway a very long time ago from my dear friend Raquel. So like they're the same. They like matched, they're like the same height. They're both like foiled and gorgeous. They both have like a really cool interior flap. So I love the cover of Ariadne, and I also love that it matches another book I have. So just good feelings all around. Number 13 is What Books Do You Need to Read by the End of the Year? And I actually don't have, I don't really do yearly TBRs, and actually this year I'm not doing TBRs at all unless it's for something I'm hosting. So I don't really have like a hard and fast list. Number 14 is favorite book community member, and you guys know I never answer these because it stresses me out too much, because I have so many people who are very important to me on this platform. I do booktube shoutout videos, and even those make me very nervous. I need to do another one of those very soon, actually. Okay, everybody, so that was the mid-year book freakout tag. I know I had a lot of answers, so I'm sure this video is much longer than it needed to be, or than most of these are. But comment down below if you have also read and loved any of these books. And comment down below and let me know your biggest surprise and biggest disappointment for this year, because I would love to know that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!